In the summer of 1972, Colonel Steve Ritchie became the only Air Force ace of the Vietnam War. Two of the victories that earned him that title happened on the 8th of July, when then Captain Ritchie and his radar intercept officer, Captain Charles de Bellevue, flying the two-seater F-4 Phantom, found themselves engaged in a low-altitude, high-speed missile-firing duel at knife-fighting distance with two enemy MiG-21s. And the worst of it was, Ritchie knew the MiGs were coming for them, but hadn't seen where they were yet.
During the intense portion of the battle, when the enemy airplanes, the MiG fighters, had us in sight and we did not have them in sight, we had received a code which was heads up. The heads up call meant that they had us in sight, they were cleared to fire, and at that time we did not have them in sight, and that information was at least 40 to 60 seconds old. So that's the kind of thing that really gets your attention. It makes you look around a lot more. I had rolled out on a heading of east, and I picked up a radio call from way in the distance, 150 miles away, among all of the chatter that was going on. And this was an officer, an Air Force officer, in a radar airplane orbiting 150 miles away over Laos, looking at his radar scope. He was very familiar with the battle, knew what was happening, knew we were under attack. I had talked with him on the telephone that morning. He knew my name and my call sign and where we would be and what the mission was about. And instead of going through the formal radio procedure, which would have been something like this, our call sign was Paula, and he would have said, Paula 01, this is Disco 23, you have blue bandits. A blue bandit is a MiG-21. You have blue bandits bearing 350 for 2, come left to a heading of 290. Now, rather than saying that, which would have been too long, it would have been too late, the MiGs would have probably been in a position to fire at us. He just said, Steve, they're 2 miles north of you. And I happened to hear it. And I made an immediate left turn to a heading of north and picked up a MiG-21 at 10 o'clock. Now, had I stayed on my easterly heading another few seconds, that MiG would have been right up our 6 o'clock, probably fired missiles at us, and we may not be telling this story today. I made this left turn to a heading of north, picked up the MiG-21, coming in at 10 o'clock, continued to roll left, blew off external fuel tanks, went full afterburner. And we passed canopy to canopy about 1,000 feet from each other, doing about 600 miles an hour each. The airplane was a split-polished silver MiG-21 with bright red stars. We could see each other. I could see the enemy pilot in the cockpit. We passed very rapidly. An important point here is that I knew there were two MiGs and I didn't see number 2. Now what they wanted us to do was turn on the first MiG, use the first MiG as bait, and sandwich us. They wanted us to turn on the first MiG, then the number 2 MiG would come in behind and shoot at us. That's something we would never do, by the way. We wouldn't sacrifice one of our own guys to get a shot at one of theirs. But they had no problem doing that. Anyway, I didn't see number 2, so I stayed level, started to dive for the ground, and waited. That's hard to do because that lead MiG is either turning to get on us or he's getting away. But I still knew there had to be 2 MiGs. There were 2 called, and they were flying in pairs of 2. And if they weren't in a fighting wing formation, they typically were in trail. So sure enough, here comes number 2, about 8,000 feet in trail. I was down below him now, and it was hard for him to see me. As we passed, I went into a hard left turn, expecting the MiGs to turn left. Well, instead they turned right, which was, I think, a critical mistake. About halfway through the turn, I picked up the number 2 MiG in a right turn level and high.
Even though Ritchie had the MiG in sight now, he was still in a bad position to fire.
So what I had to do was barrel roll, and I was able to come into a rear quarter position with the MiG high in the bright blue sky, and I was down low, a perfect position for a missile shot. I was able to get 2 missiles off. They both worked perfectly. The MiG turned hard down into me to try to get away from the missiles, and the first missile went through the center of the airplane, and the second missile went through the fireball. That took 47 seconds. We were so close that I flew over the top of the fireball, took a little piece of debris through the left wing, just a nice jolt on the stick, and got home, and there was a piece out of the leading edge of the airplane. From there, I was able to get what we call across the circle and get into position on the lead MiG. Now, here, it's important to understand that we're in a three-dimensional fight, which is hard for most people to understand. Everything that we do on Earth is in two dimensions. In the air, one has to be able to think in three dimensions and upside down and what's happening all the time. And I didn't see the other MiG, but I knew from the geometry of the fight where I thought he had to be. And I maneuvered in that direction, and sure enough, there he was. I was able to get in position, fire 2 more missiles. He was a lot better than his wingman. He turned a lot harder, and the lead missile of that second volley went through the center of the airplane, and that was 42 seconds from the prior missile hit. The total fight was 1 minute and 29 seconds.